Our final story is also one of deeply held family secrets and lies. The secrets span back several generations, but one of its redemptions happened just last week. And we here at Vogue get to be the first to hear it. Will you please welcome our final storyteller for the evening, Erik Butler.
Thanks. I think lies beget secrets, and with a little luck, redemption. My story starts on VJ Day, Victory over Japan Day, August 25th, 1945. My mother, Ethel, she hated that name forever, but she loved her Aunt Ethel, was in Michigan, in Ann Arbor. She and her friend Liz were canoeing sort of in celebration of VJ Day, and they met two handsome young Army officers in uniform in another canoe. They flirted a little, they made an arrangement to meet later, and did. My mother noticed that the wedding ring that was present on her fella's ring was now gone, and she confronted him. And he wove a tale of a wife deceased who died in childbirth recently, and this is the first time he's taken the ring off. She bought it. I guess she wanted to. Later, not very long after that, she came back to Canton, Massachusetts, where she grew up, moved back into her family home. And Thorkel, really was his name, showed up as the judge advocate lawyer for the Boston Harbor. We don't know what kind of manipulation was involved with that. But he spent a lot of time with my mother when she looked just about like this, and became an extra family member. And then he was mustered out of the Army. It was the end of the war, and he went back to Clear Lake, Iowa, where he was from. This was Thorkel. Sitting in his law office, where he was practicing law after being in the Army, my mother showed up on the Greyhound bus to say, "Thorkel, we're pregnant. Let's get married." He said, "I am married. You knew that." And she said, "No, you gave me this long story." And he said, "Well, let's drive to Mason City, where there is a back alley abortionist, basically." And my mother, pregnant with me, demurred. "Thank you." She went back home to Canton, where her, I want to get rid of Thorkel and put Mom back. So my grandfather unkindly, literally stood at the door, cast her out. She went to New York, where I was born, make a long story short, given up for adoption. 1 month later, my mother recanted, took me back, and in a long, short version of a long story, wound up in Mormon country, Utah. Quite soon married a renegade Mormon who was a, quote, recovered alcoholic. The recovery lasted just long enough for her to give birth to 4 more sons, my brothers, and then he started drinking. And he was kind of mean when he wasn't drinking, and he was really mean when he was. And after he beat her bloody when I was 9 years old, I called the cops on him. And the cops rather unkindly, so stupidly, said, "Aren't you ashamed? Your 9-year-old son has got to call us." From that moment until I was 16 and left home, I was no longer spoken to directly by my wicked stepfather. Instead, I was always referred in the third person as the bastard. My mother contrived to keep all of this secret. Her initial misdeed, as she regarded it, all the things that happened with my stepfather, and I enlisted in this secret keeping. We kept her abuse secret from the neighbors. She ran into a lot of doors. We kept my origins secret because that would have been a shameful secret in small-town Utah. And then at 16, I left on a Greyhound bus. I should have said my mother took a Greyhound bus to Iowa, so there's symmetry here. I left on a Greyhound bus and came to Boston, and I've been here ever since. Not until I married Terry in 1979 did I ever reveal to anyone my mother's secret that I had conspired to keep. And about that same time, this wise woman who became my spouse said, "You're never going to really know who you are until you find your father." So I wrote Thorkel a letter, carefully worded, because this was the era when lawyers had secretaries who opened their mail. Carefully worded, never heard back. So I was traveling to Chicago. I had suggested we should meet, and called Terry, told her that I had not heard back from Thorkel, my father, and she said, "So call him. What do you got to lose?" So I called. A voice came on the phone after a minute and said, "This is Sandy. Mr. Butler, I got your letter. I didn't quite know what to do with it because I'm sorry to tell you that my father died 5 years ago. And by the way, how did you know him?" So I say something lame like he and my mother were friends during the war, and we hung up. I called Terry to report, and she says, "Call him back. Tell him you're his brother. What do you got to lose?" So I called him back. I told him, I met him. It was unquestionably siblings. We looked a lot alike. Our voices even sounded alike. It turned out, so we went to the law office, and he said, "Dad kept everything. There's going to be something. We're going to go look." So we found two interesting things that stay with me forever. You know the great big old safes that used to exist in offices, especially I think lawyers' offices? There was one of those. There's a shelf above the locked part, and we found a dozen of those little calendars. You've gotten them from the insurance company, those little, in which the only entry in these dozen or so was a circle around my birthday. And a picture that I'd seen all my life of me as a toddler striding along in some urgent way. I think I've been striding like that ever since. And my mother in a bathing suit, looking rather elegant as a young mom. And that was pretty amazing. Then we found a blackmail letter from my wicked stepfather and a canceled check for $2,000, which was not a fair amount in 1956 when that all might have happened. So fast forward a little, Sandy, my brother, becomes my friend at least. I don't know that we feel fully like brothers. But it turns out there is a sister, Susan, who was described by my father to my mother as his niece, and he told stories of Susan, who turned out to be his daughter, not his niece. Susan didn't want to meet me. So we kept going through this. By this time, I had revealed to Terry and to others of my family my mother's secret, and I didn't feel too guilty about it. A little, but not too guilty about it. And last week, I met my sister. I went to Iowa, where she teaches voice and opera. Who knew? We agreed after about 5 hours together, too bad she turned it down 40 years ago. But she did, but we have now met. Meanwhile, and to conclude my story, my wife Terry passed away last April. After about 100 days in the hospital in the last year, she came home in hospice. And I slept beside her on the couch beside her hospital bed. And every morning at 5 o'clock, we both woke and we talked. And we talked and we talked for about 3 weeks until she began to slip away. And what I will say is we had very few secrets from each other when we started those conversations, and none when we ended. We left nothing important unsaid, and that feels like redemption.